There is a quiet confusion many people live with for years. The body hurts, but scans come back normal. Tests show nothing alarming, yet the pain persists, sometimes moving, sometimes settling, sometimes flaring without warning. And over time, a subtle doubt begins to form: is this pain real, or is it somehow my fault? Science now gives us a clearer, more compassionate answer. Chronic body pain is not imagined, and it is not a failure of strength. It is often the language of emotional patterns that have never been given words. The human nervous system is designed to learn from experience. It does not only remember injuries, it remembers environments, relationships, threats, and unresolved emotional states. When stress, fear, grief, or suppression become chronic, the body adapts in order to survive. Muscles tighten, breathing patterns change, inflammatory pathways stay active, and pain circuits become sensitized. What begins as protection gradually becomes persistence. Research in neuroscience and psychology shows that long-standing emotional stress can alter how the brain interprets signals from the body. The brain does not simply detect pain, it predicts it. When emotional patterns remain unresolved, the nervous system learns to stay alert, even when danger has passed. Pain then becomes a signal of unfinished emotional business rather than structural damage. This does not mean emotions cause pain in a simplistic way. It means the body and mind are engaged in constant dialogue. When emotions are ignored, minimized, or overridden for years, the body often takes on the role of communicator. Chronic pain, in this sense, is not an enemy. It is a pattern learned, reinforced, and potentially unlearned. Asking for understanding rather than resistance to chronic pain rarely begins where we feel it. It often begins much earlier. In moments the body remembers even when the mind has moved on. Modern neuroscience shows that the nervous system is not just a messenger of pain, but a living record of emotional experience. When a person goes through repeated stress, fear, loss, or emotional suppression, the brain learns to stay alert. Over time, this constant state of vigilance reshapes neural pathways. Pain then becomes less of a signal of tissue damage and more of a protective language spoken by a nervous system that has learned to expect danger. This is not imagination, and it is not weakness. It is biology responding to lived experience. The brain's threat detection centers, particularly those involved in survival, do not distinguish clearly between physical injury and emotional harm. From a physiological perspective, rejection, chronic pressure, unresolved grief, or long-term anxiety activate the same stress circuits as physical trauma. When these circuits remain active for months or years, they lower the threshold at which pain is produced. Muscles tighten, blood flow changes, inflammation markers rise, and pain-sensing nerves become hypersensitive. The body is not broken, it is overprotective. Research in psychoneuroimmunology demonstrates that emotional stress alters immune signaling and inflammatory responses. This helps explain why scans and tests may appear normal while pain persists. The issue is not located in a single muscle or joint, but in the ongoing conversation between the brain, the nerves, and the immune system. Pain in this context becomes a learned response reinforced by repetition, much like any other neural habit. What fires repeatedly wires deeply. Importantly, this understanding removes blame. Chronic pain is not a failure to cope, nor is it something a person chooses. It is the outcome of a nervous system that adapted to survive under emotional load. When safety was uncertain, pain became a warning system. The body learned that staying tense, alert, and sensitive was necessary. Even when life becomes calmer, the nervous system may continue operating under old rules, holding patterns shaped by the past, waiting for the next signal that it must protect, respond, or brace itself again. The body does not separate emotion from physiology. It translates feelings into physical states through the nervous system. When emotions are repeatedly suppressed rather than processed, the brain does not discard them. Instead, it stores them as unresolved signals of threat. Over time, these signals shape how the autonomic nervous system behaves. The sympathetic system, designed for short bursts of protection, begins to dominate. Heart rate stays elevated, breathing becomes shallow, digestion slows, and muscles remain partially contracted even at rest. This chronic activation quietly rewires the body toward tension and pain. Scientific studies show that emotional suppression increases activity in brain regions responsible for pain perception. When a person learns early in life to ignore fear, sadness, or anger in order to function or survive, the nervous system compensates by carrying that emotional load physically. The muscles become containers for what could not be expressed. The jaw tightens with unspoken words, the shoulders rise with responsibility, the lower back bears unresolved pressure, and the gut reacts to uncertainty and fear. These patterns are not symbolic metaphors, they are measurable neuromuscular responses driven by brain signaling. Pain emerges when the brain interprets ongoing internal tension as a sign of danger. Even in the absence of injury, the nervous system continues to send warning signals because it has not received a clear message of safety. Functional MRI studies demonstrate that people with chronic pain often show heightened activity in emotional processing centers rather than in areas associated with structural damage. This explains why pain may move, change intensity, or flare during emotional stress without any physical trigger. The nervous system is responding to emotional cues it has learned to associate with threat. Healing, therefore, is not about forcing the pain away, but about teaching the nervous system that it no longer needs to stay on guard. When emotions are acknowledged rather than resisted, neural circuits begin to reorganize. This process, known as neuroplasticity, allows the brain to reduce its reliance on pain as a protective strategy. Gentle awareness, emotional expression, and a sense of internal safety gradually lower the volume of pain signaling. The body begins to release tension not because it was commanded to, but because it finally recognizes that it is allowed to rest. The brain learns pain the same way it learns language, posture, or fear, through repetition, association, and survival-based conditioning. When the body experiences stress alongside emotional overwhelm, the nervous system records not just the event, but the internal state surrounding it. Over time, the brain begins to associate certain emotions, memories, or even neutral sensations with danger. Pain then becomes a learned response rather than a direct reflection of tissue damage. This is why chronic pain often persists long after an injury has healed or appears without any visible physical cause. Neuroscience shows that the brain's prediction centers are constantly scanning the body for signals that confirm or deny safety. When emotional stress has been prolonged, the brain lowers its threshold for what it considers threatening. Mild sensations such as muscle fatigue, digestive movement, or normal joint stiffness can be amplified into pain because the brain has learned to interpret these signals as warnings. This process is driven by neural pathways that have been strengthened through repetition. The more the brain uses pain as a protective signal, the more efficient and automatic that pathway becomes. Importantly, this does not mean the pain is imagined. The pain is real, measurable, and neurologically generated. Brain imaging studies show increased activity in pain processing regions even when no structural damage is present. What has changed is the brain's interpretation, not the person's honesty or resilience. The nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do: protect. Pain becomes a guardrail, keeping the person alert, cautious, and restricted in an attempt to prevent further harm. Emotional experiences play a central role in this learning process. When fear, grief, shame, or anger are consistently avoided, the brain never receives closure signals. Instead, it stays in a loop of anticipation. Pain fills that gap, acting as a constant reminder to stay vigilant. This is why chronic pain often intensifies during periods of emotional stress, conflict, or uncertainty. The brain is responding to familiar internal patterns, not new physical damage. The hopeful reality is that learned pain can be unlearned. Neuroplasticity works in both directions. When the nervous system is gently exposed to safety, emotional awareness, and non-threatening movement, the brain begins to revise its predictions. Pain signals gradually lose their urgency. This process requires patience because the brain does not abandon protective habits quickly. It needs repeated evidence that the body is safe and emotions are manageable. As emotional processing improves, the brain no longer needs to rely on pain as a warning system. Muscles soften, breathing deepens, and the nervous system shifts out of constant alertness. Pain fades not because it was fought, but because the brain learned a new, calmer way to interpret the body's signals. The nervous system does not heal through force or correction, but through a sustained experience of safety. When chronic pain has been present for months or years, the body has been living under the assumption that danger is always near. Muscles remain subtly contracted, breathing stays shallow, and attention is constantly pulled toward symptoms. This state is not a failure of willpower. It is the result of a nervous system that has learned to survive by staying alert. True healing begins when the brain is repeatedly shown that the present moment is not the same as the past that trained it to be afraid. Scientific research on pain modulation shows that safety signals can directly reduce pain intensity. These signals include slow breathing, predictable routines, supportive relationships, and gentle movement performed without fear. When the brain perceives consistency and calm, it gradually reduces its defensive output. Pain decreases not because the body is being forced into submission, but because the brain no longer believes it needs to shout to be heard. This shift happens at the level of the autonomic nervous system, where the balance moves away from chronic fight or flight and toward rest and repair. One of the most powerful safety signals is emotional permission. Many individuals with chronic pain have spent years suppressing feelings in order to function. The nervous system interprets this suppression as unfinished business. Unexpressed emotions remain active in the background, keeping the brain on guard. When a person allows emotions to be noticed without judgment or urgency, the brain receives new information. It learns that emotions can be felt without catastrophe. This alone can soften pain patterns that were previously rigid and unresponsive to physical treatments. Compassion plays a central biological role in this process. Self-criticism activates the same neural circuits as external threat. When a person is harsh with themselves about pain, productivity, or recovery speed, the nervous system tightens further. In contrast, self-compassion reduces stress hormones and increases vagal tone, which directly influences pain perception. This is not a psychological trick, it is a measurable physiological response. The body relaxes when it is not being internally attacked. Movement also becomes therapeutic when it is reframed as communication rather than correction. Gentle, curious movement tells the brain that the body is capable and safe. Each non-threatening motion rewrites prediction errors that previously linked movement with harm. Over time, the brain updates its internal map of the body. Areas that once felt fragile or dangerous begin to feel neutral again. Pain loses its protective value when the brain sees evidence of stability. Healing is rarely linear in this context. Flare-ups do not indicate failure. They reflect a nervous system testing old patterns. When these moments are met with calm rather than alarm, the brain learns faster. The body does not need to be convinced with logic. It responds to experience. Safety must be felt repeatedly, quietly, and patiently until the nervous system no longer needs pain as its primary language. Chronic body pain often persists because the nervous system has learned to associate certain sensations, movements, or even thoughts with threat, and this learning does not disappear simply because tissue has healed. The brain is a prediction organ. It constantly scans past experiences to decide what might be dangerous in the present. When emotional pain has been intense or prolonged, the brain stores it as a survival reference point. Later, even neutral bodily sensations can be misinterpreted as warning signals. Pain then becomes less about damage and more about protection. Understanding this changes the entire relationship a person has with their symptoms. Neuroscience shows that the brain does not distinguish sharply between physical and emotional threat. The same neural networks that respond to injury also activate during emotional distress, social rejection, or unresolved fear. Over time, these networks can become sensitized. This means the volume knob on pain is turned up, not because the body is breaking down, but because the nervous system has become exceptionally good at detecting danger. In this state, reassurance through scans or tests often fails to bring relief, because the brain is not responding to evidence, it is responding to memory. Healing at this level requires new learning, not just new information. The nervous system must experience moments where pain does not lead to harm, where discomfort does not escalate into catastrophe, and where emotions can move through the body without causing collapse. Each of these moments creates what scientists call prediction errors. The brain expects danger, but danger does not arrive. Over time, enough of these experiences force the brain to update its model. Pain gradually loses its urgency because it is no longer useful. Tension plays a crucial role in this process. When pain is constantly monitored, analyzed, or feared, the brain interprets this focus as confirmation that something is wrong. This does not mean pain should be ignored, but it should be observed differently. A curious, neutral attention tells the nervous system that sensation can exist without emergency. This shift alone can reduce pain intensity by changing how sensory signals are processed in the brain. Equally important is restoring trust in the body. Many people with chronic pain feel betrayed by their physical experience. This sense of betrayal keeps the nervous system defensive. Gentle practices that rebuild trust, such as slow movement, mindful breathing, or simply resting without guilt, send a powerful message. They tell the brain that the body is not an enemy. As trust grows, the need for constant protection fades. Emotional patterns also soften when they are brought into awareness without pressure to fix them. The nervous system relaxes when it senses honesty rather than resistance. Old emotional memories lose their grip when they are allowed to surface in a safe context. Pain often decreases not because emotions are resolved intellectually, but because the body no longer needs pain to hold them in place. This kind of healing is gradual and deeply personal. It does not rely on forcing change, but on allowing the nervous system to learn through repeated calm experiences that the present is safer than the past and that the body no longer needs to speak through pain. If this talk resonated with you and helped you see your body and pain in a new way, please like this video, share it with someone who may need it, and leave a comment below. Tell us how the video felt to you and which country you are watching from. Your reflections and experiences matter, and they help create a deeper, more meaningful conversation for everyone.